Guys, when it comes to a survival situation, you should always prepare to live. And having the right supplies and the right things that you need, the knowledge that you need to get through a tough situation. Today we're going to take a look at the top 12 ways that people die during a disaster. And hopefully that will help you to think about the things that you need to prepare for. A lot of times we just prepare for a general purpose. We want to have our food, our water, our medical, our firearms, whatever. But not looking at the different ways that people die in an everyday basis, but also especially in a disaster. Now, the number one threat is disease and infection. More people die from disease, and sometimes because of modern medicine, they're living because of modern medicine. You take that away, and they're not going to last that long. But having the basic things that you need to take care of infections, broken arms, legs, limbs, being able to take care of even the common cold and the flu and things like that, where you may not be able to get the medical supplies you need. During World War I, and for that matter the Civil War, and probably all wars together, more people died from infection, from exposure, from different diseases and viruses that went through, more than they did being shot. And so it's really important for us, especially in a grid down situation, to have our supplies together. Guys, keep your area clean. Make sure that you stay clean. Make sure you treat small cuts and things like that immediately and take care of them so they don't get infected. Also, if you're on prescription medications, make sure that you have a supply handy and ready to go ahead of time. With the recent pandemic, it's been a really good lesson on our personal hygiene, keeping our hands washed, keeping ourselves protected, and also keeping areas clean. Even garbage and your sewer system can be a hotbed for bacteria, for microorganisms, and for infection. So make sure you have the means to be able to take care of those things. Number two is starvation. While we live in a first world country, food is readily available. But we've seen lately that sometimes food can be somewhat difficult to get. There can be scarcity. But the world itself has a lot of hunger in third world nations. And so being able to have not only your food stocked up, which is number one, guys, you've got to have some food put back, have a full pantry, have some other supplies set aside, but also to be able to sustain yourself through a crisis situation. It could go longer than just a couple of 3 months. I mean, it could be a year, 2 years. And you need to be able to have that sustainable way to produce food. Gardening, of course, is one thing that I'm really big about. And guys, you don't want to wait into a crisis situation to start gardening. Even if it's just small container gardens, start your garden. And I'll keep saying that because that is a very important skill that you need to learn, and it is a skill. But also hunting. The thing about hunting is it is a way to get protein, and you need to learn, if you haven't ever hunted, really hunters in America are in a decline. And there are fewer every year, and yet we have wild game that continues to get more and more populated. And so being able to use that as a source is a great way to have meat, gardening for your vegetables, and then have your canned food and your long-term food storage set aside to carry you through those tough times. Number three, dehydration. Water is the essence of life, and in the rule of threes, you have 3 days that you can live without water. Your body starts to react to it before that time, and you just become immobilized. Now, having a good water source is number one. Find out what water that you do have available, and then you need to know how to filter it. Now, if you have a well, that's great. If you have a hand pump, that's even better for your well. But once you get the water from other sources, you need to know how to filter that water. Now, for us, we use the Big Berkey, and it is a tremendous system, but there's a lot of different filter systems out there. But also how to treat the water, whether it's using bleach or treating it in other ways. The last thing you want to do is to rely on gravel, grass, and charcoal to filter your water, but that is an option. Number four is hypothermia, and that is an extreme cold. As winter comes up, you need to be able to keep yourself warm. Most of us, if not all of us, depend on the electrical system or the gas system to be able to keep us warm. Now, while natural gas and propane work well and work for a longer period of time, if the power's out, sooner or later it's going to run out. And so having a really good way to have your heat source solidified, and I would say the best is wood heat. I mean, it's sustainable, it's something that you can use for a long period of time, and wood is all around, unless you're in a really arid situation, and typically winters aren't as cold. But having some way to heat that's an alternative to just your electrical or your utilities that you're dependent on. Also having a lot of wool blankets and different things in case you don't have any other source. So having heat is super vital, especially in the wintertime. And then you have hyperthermia. That's where you just get overheated. Whether it's a sunstroke, whether you're out in the elements, you need to protect yourself. You know, you're losing water, you're losing hydration. One thing for me is I've always laughed at people because they get too hot. And I've been out in the sun in the middle of the day for years. And one time I was at the range all day and I just got really overheated. I did have some water, but I obviously didn't have enough. And so when I got back home, I mean, my body started cramping. It was really something else. I was very lethargic. I felt like I had no energy. The sad thing is once you get to that point, it's easier to get back to that point the next time. So make sure that you keep yourself covered, drink plenty of water and fluids, and seek shelter as much as possible. But that is a very important thing that we don't always think about unless we're in more arid conditions. But that can happen anywhere. Number 6 is murder, and it's one thing that a lot of preppers kind of plan for ahead of time. But having the means to defend yourself and your property, but also not making yourself vulnerable to hostile people, and keeping out of confrontations, and having situational awareness, knowing what's going on around you at all times. When you're in the parking lot of Walmart and you're walking through, don't get on your phone and start texting. Know what's going on. If you're sitting in your car, make sure that you are aware of all the things that are going on, especially in a public situation. But for that matter, even when you're outside your home, on an everyday situation, you need to have situational awareness wherever you are. Number 7 is radiation poisoning. Now that's something that we don't typically think about, and since the Cold War, a lot of people have kind of dismissed, a nuclear attack. But as we've seen, a lot of rogue nations are now gaining the nuclear power. And a lot of them are having more access to nuclear weapons. And so it's really important to know the skills. Here's the thing, guys, unless you're directly in a nuclear blast, the big threat is fallout. But you can protect yourself from fallout. It's one video that we are working on and planning to talk about, because there are certain things that you can do to protect yourself that are really not that difficult. But it's knowing what to do that is the important thing. Number 8 is drowning. Every year, thousands of people die from drowning. But in a disaster situation, especially when you add in a lot of flooding or a hurricane or tsunami or different things like that, you need to be careful. A few years ago, we had a good friend down during Katrina, and her son went back to get a dog that was trapped in their house. Neither one returned. And guys, you need to make sure that you know the dangers that happen with drowning. One of the things about a disaster situation is there's a lot of debris that's floating around as well. So no matter how good of a swimmer you are, you can find yourself in a critical situation real quick. One great example is a riptide. Riptides happen all the time, and people get trapped and people die every year. But the very simple solution is, instead of fighting against a riptide, to swim to the right or the left and get out of the riptide. And that way you can get out and then get back to shore. A lot of these things have to do with just the knowledge. Having the knowledge, just a few simple things that can save your life. Now, number 9 is electrocution. Now, all of our houses have electrical power, and in a disaster situation, sometimes there's damage to the house, there are loose wires that can be around. In a tornado situation or high winds, you can have down power lines, water all over the road. It's a recipe for disaster. And so being careful when you notice that there are electrical lines down. In your home, if your home is damaged, knowing where the power shutoff is and shutting that power down, having family members that know where it is, and going ahead and turning it off before someone is killed. And so be careful when it comes to those live wires. Number 10 is carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, one of the big dangers here is if you have a generator. Now, generators are typically loud, and you want to insulate them to a point, and some people are tempted to bring them inside. The problem is it puts off carbon monoxide. You can have that running inside your house and then you can die because you don't want people stealing your generator. Also, getting in your car during the middle of winter, you don't have any heat, and you're in a garage and you're running your vehicle. That is definitely something that most of us do know, not to run our car in a garage. But again, knowledge is everything. Also, when you're using standard propane heaters that are not meant to be used inside, and you say, well, it's not going to hurt anything. Guys, it is taking oxygen away, and so you've got to be careful. Number 11, accidental injury. Now, one of the things about an accidental injury is that infection can happen and you can have a lot of problems, especially if there's no medical assistance anywhere. If your hospitals are overloaded or whether EMS and different services are just overrun. You can be chopping wood and an axe come down on your leg. You can be using a knife for something and then cut yourself. And that infection can lead to death. You can fall off of a ladder, you can fall off your roof. I mean, there's so many different things that can happen. You can be hit by debris. And so just be aware that accidental death happens all the time. It doesn't mean that during a zombie apocalypse, you're waiting for the zombies and yet you fall off the roof or you're hit by a car. And so because you're not being aware of the dangers that are around you. During a disaster or a crisis, guys, you really need to be on point to make sure that you keep yourself safe, not only for your life, but also from bodily injury. Number 12, and last but not least, fire. House fires consume houses, kill people every year. But in a disaster situation, you're not going to have the fire department that's going to necessarily be available. But even then, your fire alarms may not be working, your batteries might die over time. Having some fire extinguishers, when a fire happens in your kitchen, make sure that you put it out with baking soda or something, not water. And just knowing those things. Putting a blanket over a fire will also just take away the oxygen and it'll put the fire out. So if there's a way to be able to put the fire out on your own when it first gets started, that's the number one solution. But once a fire gets started, get out of the house. Most people are killed by smoke inhalation, and they breathe in the smoke and they pass out, which is more preferable than being burned to death. But possibly having some way to filter your breathing, even some kind of mask or respirator to be able to get you out of the home. One thing that's really important is to get down on the floor below the smoke. And that way you can kind of traverse your way through your house if you find yourself in that situation. But also to inform your family that that's the way to go. And so having some ideas about fire and how it is destructive can save your life. Guys, while we always talk about how to survive, it's important to understand the ways you can die. And so, guys, hopefully you can put together some plans against these things for your survival preps. Because, guys, the key here is to survive to live. And if you're serious about prepping and survival, check out Survival Dispatch Insider. It is the most credible resource on the web for prepping and survival. Many of the top names in the survival world, and we upload one video there that's exclusive every week to the Insider. I'll have a link down below in the description. It's well worth checking out. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. I mean, we've all seen with the recent pandemic. And we've all seen with the recent pandemic how be strong. Oh, this bench is hard. My butt's sore. Oh.